We're there we go. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much, Andrew, for inviting us to join this. It's a real opportunity for Jim and me and our partners, and most importantly, our own investors, to talk about investing in rural America. I'm Pat Morand. I'm a partner at Open Prairie. I've been part of Open Prairie for probably a decade now. Prior to that, I was CEO of 3 life science companies, did a couple of startups, one in Alsace-Lorraine, France, one in Athlone, Ireland, and then crossed the table in Pittsburgh to become an executive in residence in something called the Pittsburgh Life Science Greenhouse Center. Started a fund in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and engaged Open Prairie to be the back office for that fund. They did such a good job that the limited partners invited Open Prairie then to take over the management of the fund, and I joined the firm. Jim can tell you all about himself, his background, and the nature of what we're doing. And so maybe it's better that I introduce my partner, Jim, who founded the firm. And Jim, please take things away and we'll get rolling here.
Good. Hey, thank you, Pat. And Andrew, thanks for having us on. Before I do a little bit of my background, I hope today that you walk away with 3 things. One would be the opportunity to invest in rural America and why the RBIC, RBIC, whatever acronym you use for the program, why that's an important element of bringing capital to rural America. 2 is I hope we can educate you a little bit on Open Prairie. I see a lot of friends on this call. Some of this will be redundant for you. I apologize, but hopefully maybe you'll walk away with 1 nugget of new information about Open Prairie. And then third is, I hope that because of this, we can create more collaborative opportunities to invest in rural America, either in bringing deal flow to us or us collaborating and investing alongside you in investment opportunities you see in rural America. Quick background for me, I grew up on a farm that my great-great-grandfather settled in the early 1800s. I had the benefit of being a 5th generation descendant that grew up on that same farmland. My office today is 3 miles west of that farm. That farm is still owned by one of my cousins. And so it's a proud part of the heritage. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. So when we talk about rural America, it's in my DNA, it's in my lifeblood. I grew up in the ag business. Our family had 3 different operating divisions in ag, from seed company to a chemical company to a farming operation. I had the benefit of spending some time in South America, living on one of our farms as a child. So that exposure and experience in what I call getting my fingers dirty in the business really has benefited me as we build out agribusiness investments in rural America today. What we did was after the family sold the seed business in the early 90s, I went out and started doing private equity deals on my own and quickly realized that there was an opportunity for bringing a fund together to invest in opportunities in the Midwest. Open Prairie has expanded beyond the Midwest. We now have some international presence. But that being said, we saw a void in the market and an opportunity to bring capital to agribusinesses well before there was a discovery in Silicon Valley that there's such a thing as agriculture. So we've been doing this for decades. I contend that ag tech has been around for centuries. My ancestors have invested a lot of different ag tech opportunities that I won't expand upon here today, but needless to say, we see agriculture and technology and the marriage of those 2 being something that is very important and very opportunistic relative to what we look at. And then finally, I'll just note a little bit about our fund. We have a team that collectively has over 250 years of experience in food and ag. That's probably the biggest and most distinct competitive advantage that we have with our partners. In addition, we're proud to have as investment partners the Farm Credit System banks. We have 13 Farm Credit System banks and 14 commercial banks that are largely focused on agriculture. That's also a strategic component of our business and a capability we can bring to our portfolio companies, both from a networking perspective and a finance perspective. So Andrew, that's kind of a quick intro. I could expand further, but I'll bore the audience, and so I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well, maybe not bore the audience, because I do have a question. You said South America. Where in South America was the farm?
So we had a farm that was in Mato Grosso do Sul, about 100 miles west of east of Paraguay. It was a small 4,000 acre farm that my father paid at that time $150 an acre for. So pretty interesting times. It was before Brazil became a prominent soybean producer globally.
Well, 4,000 acres on the East Coast, that is a big farm, but just to put it in perspective, I know you folks out there in those I states, you kind of look down at us, but we have production out here too. And I failed to do, we have a couple celebrities on the call too. I want to make sure I recognize them. First and foremost, Dave Chesnick from the USDA. So for anyone on this call, after it's all over and you do want to go through the arduous process of applying for an RBIC, Dave is probably that first phone call you're going to make, and you'll hear his voice in the other end of that line. And Dave is amazing. He's very passionate about this. He's full of information. And quite frankly, after this is over, he and I were talking. I'd like to do a presentation like this with him, just to talk about what it looks like from the government's perspective. And then on my screen here, I see Ken Zuckerberg and Shauna Day, two of the luminaries within the agriculture world. To call them analysts is demeaning. I mean, they are geniuses, and their visibility in their individual sectors is beyond reproach. And I encourage our audience out there to monitor them and read anything they write, because it's certainly worth your time. Pat and Jim, do you see anyone else in the audience there that you'd like to give special attention to? And everyone in the audience deserves special attention, but we only have a limited amount of time to give a few shout outs.
Well, real quick, that Brian O'Kane and Paul Wooler, they're two individuals we've done a lot of deal opportunities with. So call out those two guys as well. And I thought I saw Dean Diato on, but maybe
I did too, and it looked like he was in disguise. Looks like there was someone else maybe setting up his camera.
Yeah, sorry guys. Dean had another call come up, so you've got Nate from Inova here instead of Dean.
Hey Nate.
Hey everybody.
Fellow RBIC fund. So
exactly.
And the Inova, actually, for the audience as well, Inova, Dean doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to make the same ask of him to come out here and have a conversation, because he represents a different side of the RBIC spectrum than what Open Prairie does. And he was also there at the very earliest days, so he's got some interesting stories to tell, I'm sure. But Dean, we'll leave you for a different conversation at that point in time. You know, again, RBIC, RBIC, whatever we call this thing, it's a convoluted path. So Jim, you had some familiarity with the ag sector. You know what kind of financing options are available out there.
You went on mute.
Sorry about that. There was the punchline. You missed that part. How did you discover the RBIC program? I mean, did it come to you? Did you find it? Was a confluence of both? And maybe then talk about, is that the point in time when you and Pat connected, or did you have a relationship prior to this?
So in the 2002 Farm Bill, the RBIC program was approved. At that time, we were running our first fund, and I began looking into it and the opportunity perhaps to start the first RBIC. We were an SBIC in our first fund. And so I looked at the program. It did not have the leverage component like the SBIC program, and really did not have good access to the farm credit system banks. So after a few months of exploring it back in 2003 and 2004, we elected not to pursue it. We were invited in around 2010 by the farm credit system banks to respond to an RFP for a manager to manage the first institutional RBIC fund. And we were one of, I believe, 5 managers at the time selected to interview for that. We unfortunately finished in second place, according to the farm credit individuals who monitored that. They selected another fund manager. A couple of years later, I was approached by the CoBank executives, Dave Dornbeer and Andrew Jacob, and they asked us if we would be willing to pursue another RBIC if they would commit a certain amount of dollars to help us get the fund up and going. And so we decided that it made sense. That was in 2015. And we did a first close in 2017 based upon the commitment from CoBank, Compere, Farm Credit Services of America, and Farm Credit Services of Midwest. So that was the catalyst for us to begin looking at an RBIC structure back in 15 in earnest.
You make it sound easy. I mean, it sounds like all the pieces just happen to fall right in place. And boy, I think anyone else out there that's a pending investor or someone that wants to start a fund, just follow this path. I mean, it couldn't have been easy. I mean, you were a pioneer. You had to test a lot of the assumptions and see if they came through. I mean, what are some of the lessons that you could share with some of the newer funds that are out there, which you probably have already shared privately with them as well?
Well, when I came back from that meeting with Dave Dornbeer and Andrew Jacob and told my partner Lee Strom that we were going to go out and raise this fund, and they had one stipulation: we had to bring community banks in as investors as well, our commercial banks. And Lee raised his eyebrow and he said, "Are you serious? You've got to be kidding us." And those that don't know, there's a fair amount of competitiveness between commercial banks and farm credit system banks. I'm being delicate in my term. The adage they use is that community banks and farm credit system banks play well in the field, but they don't play well on Capitol Hill. There's an adversarial kind of relationship on Capitol Hill because of I'll call it legislation. But that being said, it was not an easy task. I don't want to understate how difficult it is to raise a fund. I've just encouraged entrepreneurs that want to start a fund to do it, but to recognize that it's probably a 2 to 3 year process. Unless you have a deep pocketed family office investor that's willing to back you, it does take time. And you have to have a lot of patience and a lot of tenacity. I think the key for us was to find a great lead investor in the farm credit system banks. And that was the catalyst for us to move forward in launching a fund. And it took 2 years for us to raise it. So it's not an easy task.
And as many on this call know, back to that competitive nature between community banks and farm credit institutions, what was the incentive for community banks to do this? And what we found to be the incentive was at first we thought there's a CRA component to this. Banks get CRA eligibility if they invest in an RBIC. We discovered over time that it's a nice thing to have, but not the tipping point. If a bank has CRA troubles, they probably have other troubles too. What we found that the big tipping point that helped them join us was the fact that, and we tend to call it the trifecta, that if we invest in a good company, they make money, number one. Number two, a number of them are banks that already lend into food and ag. And because of that, they have a lot of customers that may be looking for capital beyond what the bank can lend. And if they refer those customers to us, if the diligence pans out and we invest, they've given that customer a solution. And then third, if we invest in one of their customers, guess where that money is going to flow? And if you look at the stats, for example, we do an annual impact report. We have a 5.1 syndication factor. Every dollar we put into a deal, we're able to syndicate another $5.10. So if you're a bank in a small town in Indiana, and you've invested in this, and we put $3 million into a company, if you take that factor, there's another 18 million possibly flowing through that bank. And that is a true incentive for a lot of the community banks. And now we have very good relationships. You go to our annual meetings, as Andrew alluded to earlier, you'll see great camaraderie between the community banks and farm credit banks. And
Well,
we hope to
Pat,
build
I
on
think
that with the next fund too.
it's not a huge point, but it's a very important point, is the farm credit system can't take deposits. So all that money has to sit somewhere, and the local banks or the commercial banks benefit there as well.
Right.
Well, we've kind of danced around it. You guys have an RBIC. It's got some money in it, and you've made some investments. And I think most of the audience here is really excited to hear about, what's going on there. How you doing? What are you most proud of? What lessons have you learned? And then obviously what does the future hold? But I'm really excited to hear about it, because I personally don't know. So I'm going to sit back and take some notes.
There's about 5 questions there, Andrew. I'll try to answer at least 3 of them. So I think a couple of things. In our current fund, we've made 15 investments. We completed the investment period, so we're not doing any new investments in the most recent fund, what I'll call our 2017 fund. We have 2 liquidity events that have occurred in that fund, and we have a couple others that are in processes that potentially will be liquidity events in 2023. That's important if you're in the fund management business, to be able to talk to liquidity events and returning capital to investors. We also this week officially launched our next fund, and it's an RBIC fund as well. Existing investors have stepped up nicely, and in many cases doubled, or in some cases tripled their commitment from what they did in the previous fund. So that's a good, from our perspective, nice endorsement to a process that takes a while. We anticipate that a first close will be sometime in the first half of the year, and then we'll do a final close at the end of 2023. So again, going back to patience and tenacity, these things don't come together. This is not a transactional business. It's a relationship business, a partnership business that takes years to develop. And then I think, Andrew, the other thing that we're focused on relative to what we're seeing in the market is it's a challenging market. The macroeconomics are not good. We hear looming recession being talked about, and that creates challenges not only for existing portfolio, but also for companies that are raising money. It also creates a buying opportunity in a fund manager's perspective, or from a fund manager perspective. And we see that as being quite compelling, to being an opportunity to drive even greater results because of the macro dynamics of the market today. That if an investor is considering a fund, now is perhaps the best time to be looking at a fund because of what's happening in the market. Just to underscore that a bit by example, we're seeing, I was just on the phone about a half hour before this, talking to a company about a potential term sheet, and what we're typically seeing versus what we saw a year ago was, a year ago, the liquidating preference for an investor was 1x their money. And it was simply, if I put $1 million in and the company didn't achieve quite what it was supposed to do, I got $1 million back. Today, what we're seeing is it's a 2x liquidation preference, plus it's participating. So if I put $1 million in, own 10% of the company, I get $2 million back, plus I still own 10% of the company. So for those that are not sophisticated in finance, I think that helps underscore the challenge for entrepreneurs today in raising capital and the opportunity for fund managers. Pat, there were 2 questions I probably didn't answer. Anything to add there that Andrew asked?
Andrew, you asked about lessons learned. There are good lessons and there are bad lessons. Most of the people in this room understand investing. So let's look at the bad lessons. Something I've learned in all this, I keep track of the pipeline. And in the current fund, we've been invited or approached or looked at up to 3,000 companies. If you do the math, 15 investments out of 3,000. The one lesson learned is get to the word no sooner than later. We all operate under the aura of expectations. And it's really good to have clear expectations with investors early on. That said, with the companies we like, we may say no, but we've tracked it. What is it, Jim? We've known most companies for an average over 4 years before we invest, something like that.
Yes.
And so it's good to have early introductions. And even though we're not investing now, it's good to form a relationship because, as Jim mentioned, these are not just transactions. These are long-term relationships. And in rural communities, that's a big deal. And for us, that's a big deal because reputation is what we have in the market, is our reputation. So one lesson learned is get to the word no sooner than later. But if it's really something you like, stay in touch and program that to follow up, keep in track, keep in touch. And then when the time is right, if everything else works out correctly, there's a history there that enables us to make an actual investment. A good lesson learned was in raising a fund, who to target. You look at the world of community banks, you get all the way from Citibank and UBS out here down to one of our investors, Security Bank in Laurel, Nebraska. Laurel, a town of 1,200 people. And we learned that the big ones, they can't afford to spend the time on a $100 million fund investment that they would spend on a $3 billion fund investment. It costs them the same. So it would be nice to say, oh yeah, let's go to Citibank and UBS and Bank of America, get all of them lined up because they got money, but it doesn't work. So the good lesson learned was who to target. Along those lines, another good lesson was look at those that already do a lot of ag lending. And there's some good ag databases out there of which banks lend primarily into farms and farm operations and food operations. So it helped us narrow down the pipeline and spend time. Something Jim mentioned in raising the money, we probably talked with Jim over 300 institutions along the way,
Yes.
the current fund. And
Yes.
that was before video conferencing. That was a lot of shoe leather, a lot of time, a lot of late flights, bad hotels, cold meals, cheap rental cars, and running around airports. So God bless the founders of this kind of technology. It helped us a lot. So I don't know if Andrew, that helps with some of the lessons we've learned in the process of all this.
Well, it does. And I want to take one of the
Yeah.
things you said one step further. When you're evaluating 3,000 decks or executive summaries, I know what that's like. If I want to do any semblance of diligence, it's 45 minutes. And if I want to have a conversation with the CEO, I'm talking 4 or 5 hours before I feel comfortable. I mean, if you just do the math on that time alone spent going through that process. Now,
Yeah.
a lesson learned, have you figured out a way to take that from a reactive incoming to a proactive, shrinking that strike zone and just saying, this is the only thing we're looking for? Well, we'll send you in other directions. We're not afraid to, take your call, but this is, have you done anything? And if it gets to business operations, trade secrets, don't tell me that, but have you learned how to do that as well?
A lot of it is pure logic, just saying, here's our thesis, and you don't meet our thesis.
You answered my next question here, because someone in the audience also asked about the thesis for this, and is there a subsector focus with this new fund, or can you even talk about what that thesis might look like?
I mean, Attila the Hun was very effective, but he left a wake behind him, and we're very aware of consequences. So we can tell people you don't fit the thesis, but if the relationships start off nice, here's some people we know that may be interested in this, or who have you been trying to reach? Maybe we can help with those introductions, or just not now, or clearly this is outside our sector. We don't understand this. We don't invest in this. So, but thanks for thinking of us.
And I'm smiling here because Pat has said those words to me before, and I knew the answer to that question before I asked it, but I figured the audience would want to hear that as well.
Hey, Andrew, let me jump on that question as well real quick. There are a couple of entrepreneurs that I see on the screen that I've been talking to on a pretty regular basis that are not quite to the level, or haven't been quite to the level where we could invest, since we're a growth stage investor, meaning that we want to see pretty good revenue traction and a pretty good sense of ability to get to profitability with our capital. That being said, that's part of our cultivation process that allows us to be able to state that the average time from when we meet an entrepreneur to when we put money in is averaging about 4 years. And one of the things we do as well, and I've done it with one of the people on the call, I won't call them out, is help introduce them to some of our network. And that's pro bono. And the way we look at that is that if we can help grow their business and they can create more value, then we can invest at the right time. And maybe we're leaving money on the table by that strategy, but we don't think so. We think it helps them get to a level where it becomes really helpful for us to say, they're at that maturity level, we can now put money in. So we're excited about that being a part of our thesis, and an ability to really generate quality deal flow that is different perhaps than how inbound type of funds might take on deal flow.
That is important. And we've got a couple more things to cover here, but I do want to be cognizant we have a fantastic audience there, and I'm sure that there's a couple questions that are bubbling up. And if you don't feel comfortable putting a question in the chat box and having it addressed in this forum, certainly feel free to reach out to Pat or Jim. As you can see, they're incredibly approachable and tend to have all the answers scripted out right there. I think we're blazing through this thing, gentlemen. I don't think we're going to hit 60 minutes. I don't think there's any chance of the heck of that happening. Well, one of the things I did ask of you, and I really wanted you to think long and hard about that, is any audience, any person who's watching this or currently or will views it in the future, what is it they can do for you? I mean, what is it? Is it an introduction? Is it stroking a check? Is it something else that they can do? But let us know how we can help you. I mean, you've been so generous of your time here and letting us know about the RBIC program.
I think, Andrew, we are always interested in learning more about opportunities, whether that's inbound investment or if there's an investor that's looking to collaborate with us on a deal. That's a lot of our network capability and our, I think, our strength. And we can add a lot of value to an existing company. If the fund already has an investment in a company, we can be helpful in helping grow that portfolio asset. So,
Jim, not to introduce you, I failed to mention something here, but the RBIC, there's very specific rules of where that money can be deployed. I don't think we really covered that in depth. Can you just talk broadly about where these funds could go?
Sure. So Dave Chesnick's on the call as well, and Dave's been a great partner to work with as we have navigated through the RBIC rules. They are very specific. They're by code. I think the summary way to look at it is that it needs to be in a community with a population of under 50,000 people. There is a map that the USDA has where you have to go into census tract, and it's more detailed than what I just explained, but I think that's a summary way to look at it. In addition, I think there's another catch-all opportunity relative to that previous statement, and that is if you can make a strong case that is going to create jobs in rural America, that is also a way that one can make the case for investment. Again, that requires a fair amount of work with USDA. We're thrilled to work with Dave Chesnick and his team. That has been a very good relationship. and Dave is very instructive in making sure we stay, I'll call it in the guardrails of what we should or shouldn't do. But to date, that we have not seen the RBIC rules as being encumbering in any way.
And you have experience navigating them. I mean, that muscle memory in itself is that's worth quite a bit there also. We did have another question here. And this goes back to the investors, those that can help you out there to get the fund to where it needs to be. Are you entertaining any investors that are non-financial service related?
Yes, we are. We have several family offices, some high net worth, some existing investors that are re-upping that are individuals. So, if you're interested in learning more, we'd be happy to talk to you. Drop an email to Pat or me. I'm Jim at openprairie.com, and Pat is P. Morand at openprairie.com.
That keeps it simple. And it looks like Nick has asked a question there as well. And rather than me trying to read that with my 50-plus-year-old eyes, I'll see if one of you gentlemen can discern that tiny font there.
Hey, Nick, thanks for the question. I think one of the things I'll state, we did not come from the fund management business, so we don't have rules and regulations on how we look at investments. We're very entrepreneurial. So to your question on revenue traction, I think what we want to see is that you have built a business that has recurring revenues would probably be the more important thing. What numbers there on the top line is probably less relevant than what you can show in your ability to take growth capital and make it profitable. So by that as an example, let's say you're doing $500,000 in revenue and losing $500,000 a year. If you say with this $2 million that Open Prairie would invest, I can build this business in $1 million a year and make it profitable within 6 or 12 or 18 months. And after that, I can make it even more profitable and generate, 3 million of top line by year 2 or 3. And I can generate 20 or 25% bottom line results. That's what we're looking for. We do not have scripted approaches to what revenue traction means. So I think if you have a business or someone that does, we'd rather peel it back and look at it and tell you where we could go with it than to sit here and tell you that there's a formulaic way to get to a conclusion.
Oh, I love it. I mean, that is a graduate level answer right there. And I'm glad we recorded that. We'll have to transcribe that and put it in a PDF and send it out to all the other young investors. That's good stuff. Hey, I think we kind of really gone through most of the stuff here, but I do want to make sure that both Pat and Jim, what questions were you not asked, or did I not ask you, or what things have we not covered that you think are really important for our audience to remember and walk away with?
I think from a fund manager perspective, there are some fund managers on. I think that persistence and staying true to your course. We have not deviated in our case from our mission with what we're investing in. We actually put our new deck. We went to market again this week, Monday, with our new fund officially. Our deck from our fund that we marketed beginning in 2015 and our sector focus is 99% the same, or 98% the same as what it was in 2015. So sector focus is not changed. There's no mission creep. We're still growth stage focused. We did a little bit heavier early stage in our last 2017 fund. We're going to do less early stage. That would mean companies that are not profitable and don't have a real good path to profitability. So if anything, we're staying very true to the course, fund managers. For entrepreneurs, I think the key thing is, not unlike the other, is be persistent. Andrew, you did not ask me this, but I'm going to quote from my favorite book. My favorite book, and I think it's the best salesman book ever, is as follows. Would you like it in a house? Would you like it with a mouse? Would you like it in a boat? Would you like it in a moat? So if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have this book, get it on your desk. This is the best entrepreneur's book, the best sales book ever made. It beats Dale Carnegie's book. So I'd encourage you to think about, don't give up. Keep asking the question. Ask the question differently. Present your case differently. So hopefully that is helpful both to fund managers and entrepreneurs.
And Pat, I'm going to let you then have the final word. Maybe you've got some kind of joke to leave us with, something like go down to the round room. They can't corner you there. You got a whole bushel full of these things. So I'll let you round this out, my friend.
Andrew, there are two kinds of jokes, clean and funny. And so in the interest of propriety, I will not tell a joke today. Some violate the rule. I guess if I might, and not as the final word, Andrew, it's your podcast. I would encourage people, along with what Jim said, keep following up. I can't tell you how many people we've tried to introduce to others or open the door, open the window, set it up, and people don't follow through. There's always the fear of rejection, but rejection in a way is a positive thing. It's something. One of my favorite poems is the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. I don't know if you remember this. There's a phrase in it, a painted ship on a painted sea. Everything is just still. Nothing is happening. And the guy's dying on the ship. All this, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. And so indifference is probably the worst thing that can happen. So my advice is keep pushing, follow up. Even if you get the word no, that's something. And people do appreciate professional persistence, not pain in the neck persistence, or trying to keep something alive that's clearly dead persistence. But I really appreciate that. And everyone here on this call understands that you've all been through it. You know what it's like. So Andrew, I would toss it back to you with your persistence. Thank you in setting us up and your persistence in trying to help create even greater value in rural America, all the way from your background you've got here on the screen to your personal life and trying to grow rural communities, which is pretty much a good backbone for the nation.
Oh, I believe so too. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate that. And I appreciate our friendship as well, beyond all the things that we've had here. And of course, Trevor winds up with a big pitch and throws the softball over the plate as we're turning the microphones off. So Trevor, what I'm going to do is take that question and park it and bring it on for our next webinar, because I think that in itself would be an hour and 20-minute discussion on where the future of technology and agriculture, or the intersection is going to be, because I've certainly got quite a few thoughts on that topic as well. But for everyone else out there, it's not hard to find these gentlemen. I put their links in the chat box. You can Google their names. You can find Open Prairie if you look for that on the internet. Please give them a hand, support them, track them. If you see a company in their portfolio that would be a benefit to someone that you're affiliated with, certainly throw business their way. That benefits not only them, but the farm credit system in rural America. So it all feeds back in there. And Mr. Chesnick, Mr. Zuckerberg, Shauna Day, all the rest of the VIPs in this call, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a very restful and rejuvenating holiday season as well. And with that, I'm going to end the recording.